Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar where we're going to be talking about rethinking proof of work and understanding Nexa's architecture by Andrew Clifford, who is the president of Bitcoin Unlimited. He will tell you a little bit more about himself and his background. He's been around for a long time and fully understands proof of work and the limitations, and is going to explain how Nexa's architecture is fixing some of the problems. But first, before we get into that, I am going to take you through the fundamentals of blockchain. So if you are new to blockchain and cryptocurrency in the ecosystem, this session is for you. If you've been around for a while, this might be some refreshing knowledge for you to take into consideration. But it's a good part for you to understand the basics before we jump into part 2, where Andrew is going to be diving deeper into Nexa's architecture. Before we get started, I just want to quick disclaimer. This is for educational purposes only. We are not providing any financial advice. This is always recommended that you do your own research, and we always record our content and then we share it inside the Education Hub. So for those of you who have not had a chance to meet me, my name is Danielle Marie. I'm the founder of Revolver, which is an education and mentorship platform for focused specifically for women. And I'm the founder of All Things Blockchain, which is a nonprofit organization that we founded back in November 2020. And I have been a crypto and blockchain educator for over 5+ years. If we have not connected already, you can go ahead and scan that QR code. I'd love to connect with you and see how I can support you on your journey. As I mentioned, we have the Education Hub. If you have not signed up already, it's 100% free and it is powered by our amazing sponsors, which Nexa is one of our sponsors. And we have different courses in there that you can take, from RWA, DeFi Basics, Crypto Essentials, and soon we'll have the Nexa Basics. And we are bringing Build on Nexa in the near future. So always new content being added into the Education Hub. So you can go ahead and join the Education Hub 100% free. We will be taking questions and answers. So as we go through, if you have a question, go ahead and pop it into the chat, and we will 100% make sure that we go through those questions for you at the end of the session. Let's jump into part 1 of the fundamentals of blockchain technology. Why understanding the fundamentals matter. Before we jump into part 2, where we're going to dive into the architecture of Nexa. Blockchain has its own language, so understanding the basics helps you make better decisions, but it's not about completely, fully understanding it. You don't have to be super technical. We just want you to understand the concepts, so when Andrew takes us through part 2, you have a little bit of a better understanding. So crypto versus blockchain. So for those of you that are new to the ecosystem, a lot of people, when they think of crypto or they hear blockchain, they think crypto. They don't understand that cryptocurrency is actually a digital currency that is used to secure the transaction on top of the blockchain network. So a blockchain network, which also stands, is a decentralized digital ledger, so DLT. And there's different types of DLT, and we're not going to unpack that in today's session, but we are going to talk about blockchain. So blockchain is the network, and it uses these things called consensus mechanisms, which we'll unpack shortly, to create these secure and immutable records. Cryptocurrency is just built on top of the blockchain. So what is blockchain? Now, we don't have enough time to unpack it in depth. We have some other short courses where I go into a lot more detail. So if you are new to the industry, you might still be wanting to understand it on a deeper level. So you can go and check out those videos. But I do want to just paint the picture for anybody that is new. So I like to think of blockchain as a way that we store data, and it creates these immutable records. Immutable just means that it can never be tampered with or altered with. Then it creates new flows of value. We talk about this in the diploma of blockchain and how it creates and delivers new flows of value. And it creates these trustless transactions. Now, we use something called smart contracts where we remove the middleman to be able to create these trustless transactions. And it is fully transparent. All public blockchains are available for anybody to go on and see the transactions that are on that particular blockchain. So, how does it work? It's a very in-depth question to answer, but at a very high level, you'll have a chain, and every chain will have a genesis block. So you'll see here in the picture, the previous hash is 0. And then in the next block, it is got the previous hash, and then it has a new hash. Now, these hashes are like a digital fingerprint, and it creates this very long chain, which ultimately becomes very difficult to tamper with. And with proof of work, it needs a lot of computational power to be able to hack the chain, if we want to say it in very kind of simple words. Now, for those of you that are new to blockchain, you're probably like, okay, what she's saying doesn't make sense. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to learn it more on an in-depth level, and I just noticed a typo in blockchain, you can go and watch the Web3 basics, and I go into a lot deeper of what is blockchain. So what goes inside of a block? Every block has a timestamp. Then we add the data. So whatever data is being recorded. Then it is given a hash. So that's like the unique fingerprint for that particular block itself. And then it has the those are the opposite way around. The previous hash and then the hash. I think you get what I mean. So the timestamp, the data, the hash, and the previous hash is what is in each block. So what is a layer 1 blockchain? So for those of you that are new, you're going to hear about layer 1s, layer 2s. I think there's even something called layer 3s, and it can get really confusing. So it's important to understand. So a layer 1 blockchain is the main blockchain network. It is essentially the foundation. Then this is where the transactions are recorded and processed onto that particular blockchain. This is where the rules of the network are set and enforced. So remember when I talked about smart contracts earlier, there are rules that are coded into the smart contract and into the blockchain, and these rules need to be met for any data or any transactions to be added onto the blockchain. This layer is basically the main layer that everything else is built on top of. So when you hear of a layer 2 blockchain, that will always be built on top of a layer 1 blockchain. So let's look at some examples. Bitcoin, which is the original OG. Then we have Nexa, which is a layer 1 blockchain, which we're going to hear more from Andrew shortly. And then Ethereum. And Andrew is going to explain some of the limitations of Bitcoin and Ethereum and what Nexa is doing differently in their architecture to make Nexa more scalable, but also keep the security, which is very, very important when it comes to blockchain transactions. So what is decentralization? Decentralization means that not one single person or company controls the network. I think that we all know that banks or corporates are all kind of controlled by a handful of people. So the power in decentralized is it's shared across many different participants. Anyone can participate in being, a node validator or can participate in transactions. So anyone can join and participate. So this system continues to run even if parts of it fail. This will make a little bit more sense as we go through today's presentation. So there's different types of consensus mechanisms and network roles, and I'm going to touch on this briefly to give you some context before we jump into the second half. So not all blockchains work the same way. Each blockchain uses a consensus mechanism to secure the network. Now, this determines how the transactions are validated. It's very important to understand if you are going to invest in any type of cryptocurrency, what blockchain is it on? And then what consensus mechanism is this blockchain using? And how decentralized is it? Just because it's a blockchain doesn't necessarily mean that it is fully decentralized. So it's very important that you take the time to understand the differences between consensus mechanisms and the different chains that are using these consensus mechanisms. Now, the two most popular ones are proof of work and proof of stake. And I'm going to unpack these a little bit further. Now, there's some chains that use a combination of both, and there's some chains that use completely different mechanisms, which we're not going to touch on today because we don't have the time to go through all of them. But before we talk about different types of consensus mechanisms, what are network incentives? So participants are rewarded for helping secure the network. So depending on if it's proof of work or proof of stake, which we'll get to in a moment, if you want to participate, you will get rewarded for participating in helping secure the network. Now, these are given for validating transactions and then adding blocks onto the network. Incentives are designed to encourage honest behavior, and the more participants, the stronger and more secure the network. That's why I had mentioned earlier, it's important to understand what consensus mechanism a blockchain is using and how many participants and how many validating nodes that they have, because the more participants and the more validating nodes that they have, the more secure the network is. So these rewards keep the network running without having a central point of authority. So remember I talked about proof of work and proof of stake. These are the two most common and popular ones that you're going to come across. So proof of work is the consensus mechanism that Bitcoin uses to secure the network. It uses mining. So you might have heard of Bitcoin mining before, way back in the day, and I'm sure Andrew could probably tell stories way better than I could. You used to be able to mine Bitcoin just off of a laptop. Now it takes a lot of computational power, and there's big mining facilities. Kind of like if you think of like an AI data center, if I'm trying to give you a picture of a visualization. These miners compete to solve these kind of complex mathematical problems. The first one that solves the problem gets to add the next block to the chain. So remember earlier when we talked about the different blocks and what goes inside them? Once the transaction is validated and who has solved that problem, they're the ones that get to add it onto the chain, and then they are rewarded for that adding that block onto the blockchain. Once it becomes added to the blockchain, it becomes very difficult to change. And the reason why I say very difficult to change is because it uses 256 SHA hash, and I'm not qualified enough to explain it from a technical level. But to this date, nobody has been able to break that hash. People talk about computational quantum computing and how that may jeopardize because it may have enough power to be able to hack the chain. But for now, it is very, very, very difficult to change. Then we have proof of stake. So it's another consensus mechanism, but it doesn't use computational power. It uses staking. So this is where participants have to lock up their tokens instead of mining. So they have to lock up a certain amount of tokens, and every chain is different. For example, Ethereum, I believe, is 32 Ethereum if you want to be a validating node for Ethereum, and every other chain, as I mentioned, will be different. You have to lock those up. Then validators are selected to confirm transactions. Once the transaction is confirmed, it adds a new block to the blockchain, and then the validator gets rewarded. Now, if a validator acts maliciously, they can lose their stake of their tokens. So the idea is that the value of the tokens that they have locked up is worth more than they would if they tried to be a bad actor while they're validating transactions. So a little summary here. Proof of work uses hardware. Proof of stake uses capital. Proof of work is energy intensive. Proof of stake is low energy. Proof of work, open participation if you can afford the hardware. Proof of stake, you use tokens, and proof of work is a proven model by Bitcoin, and proof of stake is a relatively still newer model that came in a couple of years ago now. My memory is taking a blank of when Ethereum moved over to proof of stake. So this is a nice little table to kind of give you another difference. We do share all of the slides and the recordings into the LMS, into the Education Hub. So feel free, if you want access to these, that you can go ahead and join the Education Hub, and we will share those for you. Before I hand it over to Andrew, there is something called the blockchain trilemma. And it has been years of discussion of who can solve this problem. Because we have decentralization, which we talked about earlier. Then how do we keep the network secure? A lot of chains are fully decentralized and very secure, say like Bitcoin. However, they have a hard time with scalability with transactions. And I was actually speaking with Andrew about this before we kicked off this webinar. And that is one of the things that Nexa is focused on solving, is making it fully decentralized, also keeping the security level, but also the scalability to allow transactions to be processed at the levels of, say, Visa, for example. So what is Bitcoin halving? I mentioned this because I know that Andrew is going to talk about Nexa and the Nexa halving. For those of you that are new, you may have not heard about the Bitcoin halving, but it happens every 4 years, approximately every 2010 blocks. And I'm not going to discuss it in great detail, but I highly advise that you go and look into this so that you can fully understand. But every 4 years, the reward is reduced by half. So it happens after a set number of blocks, and that's why it's approximately every 4 years. And in Bitcoin particularly, I know that Andrew's going to talk about Nexa. It occurs every 2010 blocks, and each halving reduces the number of new coins created. So this is also another way on how Bitcoin keeps its value. So it started off back in 2009, if you were mining Bitcoin, you got every block that you added, you got 50 Bitcoin. Now it's actually 3.25 now, because we've had another halving since this photo. So it slows down the supply entering in the market. And this is why a lot of people say Bitcoin is the new store of value. Now, what is a UTXO? Unspent transaction output. This is a way of tracking value on the blockchain. It works like digital cash, not an account balance. You hold, if you're holding a cryptocurrency that uses UTXO, like Bitcoin or Nexa, and Andrew will probably explain it way better than I do, you hold an individual piece of that value. So the transactions combine and then split into different pieces, and any unused amount is returned as change. Now, I am not the best person to explain UTXO, but that's why we have experts like Andrew to come onto the call and explain things like these types of topics in more in depth. But the main thing that you need to know that the value is tracked as digital cash, not as account balances. So if we put it all together before we hand it over to part 2 and we bring on Andrew, you should have a basic understanding what is a layer 1. That is the foundational blockchain. Different blockchains have to use different consensus mechanisms. For example, proof of work or proof of stake. There are differences between nodes and validators. Participants earn by supporting in the network, and scalability really matters when we're talking about real world adoption. The reason why Bitcoin is kind of referred to more as a store of value or, digital gold is because it's not scalable to use for everyday transactions. But a lot of the other chains, I'm not going to mention any names, that claim that they, are scalable and they can do X amount of transactions per second. If you go and look into their consensus mechanisms, they are not very secure. They may only have one client node. They may not have very many validating nodes. So it's really important. This is where your own research and knowledge is so important before you start investing in any type of tokens, or if you're looking at building an application, if you have a business idea, it's really important that you understand the chain that you're building on or investing in, what consensus mechanism that they're using, how many validating nodes do they have, how decentralized is the chain, because your investment or your business is dependent on the longevity and sustainability of that chain. So I hope that kind of gave you a good foundation of knowledge before we hand it over to Andrew. As I mentioned previously, if you have some questions, you can go ahead and pop them in the chat and we will go through them at the end. But that is enough for me. I want to invite Andrew Clifford, who's the president of Bitcoin Unlimited and has been in the space for a very long time, back when Bitcoin came around. He's been there, went through the Ethereum launch. So he is definitely the man to explain the Nexa architecture to you. Andrew, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Danielle, and thanks for that great introduction as well. I'll just share the presentation and we can make a start. And thanks everyone for joining today, and I hope you'll find this an interesting presentation on proof of work and what we've done with Nexa to make it different. Now, what I want to do is just go briefly through the history of the proof of work model for decentralized blockchain consensus, what it is, where it came from, and why it still matters. We'll look at its reputation for energy wastage, but also why it has unique benefits too. We shall see how Nexa has made several practical breakthroughs in advancing proof of work, also known as PoW for shorthand. So Danielle has explained the conceptual groundwork of layer 1 UTXO's decentralization and the blockchain trilemma very graphically. Thank you. What I'm going to do in this second half is take those concepts and apply them to a functioning cryptocurrency. We'll go from the origins of proof of work in the early 1990s as an anti-spam mechanism to its role in Bitcoin mining and security. Then I will introduce Nexa PoW and what users need to know about mining Nexa after its next algorithm upgrade. So early research by Dwork, Nayor, and Back. Most people assume proof of work was invented by Satoshi Nakamoto, but it wasn't. This concept has roots going back into the early 1990s, more than a decade before Bitcoin. So in 1992, Cynthia Dwork and Moni Nayor published a paper proposing what they called computational pricing functions. The problem they were trying to solve was email spam. At the time, email usage was minimal. It was relatively new, but researchers were already worrying about what would happen when sending millions of emails became cheap and easy. The public were already annoyed by junk mail in the letterbox increasing each year. It seemed that digital emails spammed constantly to thousands of people would ruin this new technology. Similarly, the internet was also new to the public. The World Wide Web was just a year old. Couldn't websites and digital services be hit with thousands of information requests? Denial of service was a real risk. So their insight was elegant. Consider when accessing a network service and the requester has to first perform a small amount of computation, nothing too expensive for a legitimate single user, but very costly if anyone wanted many connections. Similarly cheap to send a single email, but expensive to send a million. A spammer would have to pay with CPU usage rather than money, and CPU cycles can't be faked. So this was a genuinely new concept. They proposed a form of computational effort as a defense against abuse. Their key insight is that computation takes time and resources, and that can be used to impose a cost on attackers without requiring a trusted central authority to determine who is legitimate. Then in 1997, a British cryptographer named Adam Back took this idea further with Hashcash. Back's idea was to use cryptographic hash functions as the basis of computing work. So a hash is a digital fingerprint of usually a much larger chunk of data. For example, a 1,000,000-byte document can be reduced to a 20-byte hash, and this is a one-way process. The document can't be recovered from the hash. Also, by using a hashing formula with the avalanche effect, a single letter change in the document will result in a completely different hash result. This means a document or any data could be hashed many times, provided there is a small irrelevant change called a nonce. The resulting hash can be checked against a target. So in Hashcash, to send an email, the sending system has to find a hash value below a certain threshold, which is a computationally expensive task to perform, but trivially cheap for the recipient to verify. So we can describe it like the invention of a single digital postage stamp. So it costs something to create, proving that effort has been expended. Importantly, Hashcash was not a transferable digital coin. It was a one-time token that proved work had been done. The stamp gets used and discarded. So that distinction matters a lot when we get to Bitcoin, because Satoshi's breakthrough was in making the proof of work the foundation of a consensus mechanism for a transferable capped digital currency. So for what it's worth, Hashcash caught enough attention that Microsoft launched a project called Penny Black in 1999. It was an email postage system based on similar ideas, requiring centralized ticket servers. And it was never released publicly, but these ideas were circulating in the research community. What was missing was the full architecture that Satoshi would later provide. Treating a hash like a number gives grain control on the difficulty of the computing work required, making it the best form of proof of work for future systems like blockchains. So here, the proofs of work by Jacobson and Jules in 1999. The term proof of work was itself formally coined by Marcus Jacobson and Ari Jules in a 1999 paper. And what they did was take the work described by others just mentioned and give a rigorous formal structure. They made an important distinction. In most cryptographic systems, a prover demonstrates knowledge of a secret, such as a password or a private key. The verifier checks whether the prover knows the secret without revealing it. Jacobson and Jules proposed a different model where the prover doesn't demonstrate knowledge of the secret, they demonstrate they performed a computation. that did specific work. The verifier doesn't check whether the person knows something, they check whether they did something. So this is a simple and profound shift. And knowledge can potentially be stolen, shared, or guessed. Computation, in contrast, has to actually happen with real time and real resources. No one can fake a calculation, a new calculation, without actually doing it first, because the nonce changes all the time. Every hash calculation is different. So the two-party model they described, a prover and a verifier, is the basic architecture that underlines every proof of work system seen today, including Bitcoin and Nexa. When a miner submits a block, they're playing the role of the prover. Every full node on the network plays the role of the verifier, independently checking the work was done correctly without trusting the miner. So the requirements for proof of work for a blockchain. Advancing from hash cache to blockchain consensus is a complex task. There are a number of important elements that proof of work needs to have for it to work within a decentralized blockchain. The first requirement is that as global computation grows, there must always be more work to do. So Bitcoin's difficulty adjustment handles this. As more miners join and the network's total hash rate increases, the target difficulty increases too, so that blocks are still produced approximately every 10 minutes. If the difficulty didn't adjust upward, more miners would just mean faster blocks, which would break the security model. So secondly, the difficulty of the work must be able to vary up and down dynamically. Difficulty can't only ratchet upward. Sometimes miners leave the network, reducing the hash rate. Difficulty must come down so that blocks continue to be produced, averaging the required time interval. This flexibility is essential for a viable network. And third, miners must compete, not cooperate. So this is the opposite of how most scientific distributed computing works. In something like folding at home, where volunteers donate CPU time to fold proteins, all the computers work together on the same problem. In proof of work mining, every miner is racing against every other miner doing different hashing computations. Cooperation would allow collusion, however. It is competition that makes the system trustless. Even hashes submitting shares to the same pool will compete between each other. And fourth, there must be asymmetry between proving and verifying. The miner must expend significant resources finding a hash within target. The node verifying that hash must be able to do so almost instantly. If verification were as hard as mining, the whole network would grind to a halt. And then fifth, miners cannot pre-compute and store solutions. So each proof of work challenge is tied to the current block, which has the previous block hash, the timestamp, and transaction data, as previously mentioned. That makes the problem unique every time, so it is not possible to build a library of pre-calculated answers. And sixth, more hardware should proportionally mean more output. This is what makes proof of work fair in the game theoretic sense. A miner's share of block reward should be proportional to its share of the total hash rate averaged over time, so there should be no shortcut. Satoshi Nakamoto was the first to achieve all six of these elements simultaneously in Bitcoin. Each one of them had been identified in prior work, but nobody had managed to assemble them into a coherent working system before 2008. So the key benefit of proof of work over proof of stake is fair distribution. So why use proof of work at all when proof of stake exists? Proof of stake is far more energy efficient, the argument goes, and major networks have moved to proof of stake, such as Ethereum in 2018, or 2022 actually, was started with it. The most important answer is one that's easy to overlook. The proof of work drives fairer distribution, which proof of stake fundamentally cannot. When Nexa launched, there was no pre-mine or allocation or venture capital funds or founding team carve-out. Every single unit of Nexa in circulation today was earned by someone doing computational work on the network right from the Genesis block. So this is what a fair launch means in practice. Bitcoin has the same property. Satoshi famously mined the early blocks alongside anyone else who wanted to run the software. So the supply entered circulation through public participation, not through any boardroom or backroom decisions. So proof of stake can't deliver this. By definition, in a proof of stake system, users earn rewards into proportion of how much the currency they already hold that they're staking. This means that founders, investors, and early insiders holding coins at launch earn the most from the system starting at day one. So proof of stake can be designed fairly, but it cannot make an initial distribution fair through the protocol mechanisms alone. So proof of stake is best adopted after most of the supply has already been distributed through mining, when the initial allocation is less the allocation questions less acute, and the future of Nexa may be in 10, 20, 25 years' time. It may well be a proof of stake system as well, or a hybrid system. So that isn't ruled out. So the fixed supply and emission curve. So like Bitcoin, Nexa has a fixed total supply. There will never be more than the predetermined 21 trillion Nex coins. Like Bitcoin, they enter circulation through the block rewards. And after every 4 years, the block reward halves, which you also heard about just a moment earlier from Danielle. The rate at which new coins enter circulation slows by half and then repeatedly afterwards. The total supply approaches its cap but never exceeds it. So this creates what can be called a deflationary arc. It's not in the sense that the currency deflates in purchasing power necessarily, but in the sense that the issuance rate is mathematically guaranteed to decrease. And critically, no central authority manages this. No committee decides whether to print more or less. The schedule's encoded in the protocol, and changing it would require consensus across the entire network. So what halvings mean for incentives? Halvings are not just a supply mechanic. They restructure the incentive landscape of the network over time, and the understanding of this is important to those who are thinking about mining. The killer application for cryptocurrency is money, and successful money requires natural scarcity. So gold is valuable in part because there isn't very much of it, and finding more requires real work. Bitcoin and Nexa reproduce this property in a digital setting, and halvings are the mechanism through which that scarcity increases over time as the protocol matures. So early holders, whether they're miners, early buyers, or node operators, participate during the period of highest issuance. There are more tokens available, but the network is less proven. Over time, the supply tightens. If adoption grows, each token represents a larger share of a more established network. So that's the trade-off that halvings encode. For miners specifically, the early phase of the network is also most profitable in terms of block rewards. They're being compensated well for providing security during the period when the network needs it most, when it's young and still establishing its hash rate and attack resistance. Over time, as block rewards decline, the network must sustain miners through transaction fees. So this is a deliberate transition designed into the economics from the start of the launch of the network. Any talk about proof of work must consider the issue of its energy consumption. And its most common criticism about this consensus model for blockchain security. So Bitcoin security relies on real world energy expenditure, and obviously Nexa does as well. Every hash, every terahash per second on these networks represents actual electricity being consumed by actual hardware. So that's precisely what makes attacking these networks more costly. For an attacker to rewrite Bitcoin's transaction history, they would need to redo more work than the whole network has done, outcompeting the rest of the world's miners sustained over a long period, and that takes a huge amount of energy. So arguably this energy expended is wasteful. Burning electricity to run computations that produce nothing except a number below a target is pure waste. However, it is the cost of decentralized monetary security which the energy expenditure is driving. Digital gold needs attack resistance, and that's worth paying for. Also, the mainstream banking system consumes enormous amounts of energy as well by running data centers, branches, ATM networks, card processing and infrastructure, and tens of thousands of employees driving to and from work. So it's all more spread out and less visible. Around 2013 to 14, as Bitcoin's energy footprint became more apparent, blockchain engineers began exploring an alternative. What if the proof of work computation could itself be useful for solving scientific problems? Could it be put to use on protein folding or searching for prime numbers or drive distributed simulations? So if that work is being done elsewhere anyway, why not make the proof of work on crypto do something more productive at the same time? So the problem with useful proofs of work is that it turns out to be much harder than it looks, and all the direct attempts only had partial success because the central problem is that the blockchain requires very specific properties in its proof of work computation. The proof of work needs to be unpredictable, random, and memoryless, which means that every calculation is independent. If someone does 10,000 failed attempts to get a hash below target, there is no advantage on having the 10,001st attempt. So this is what makes mining fair. The chance of finding the next block is proportional to the current effort and not the accumulated effort beforehand. So most generally useful computations don't have the structure. Protein folding, for example, has structure where some search paths are more promising than others. And prior computation informs future computation. So that structure is what makes the computation useful scientifically, but it would undermine the security of any blockchain trying to use it for consensus. So the more structured and useful a computation is, the harder it is to preserve the randomness and uniformity of that consensus mechanism. The two goals pull in opposite directions. Projects that tried to bridge them ended up with compromises that satisfied neither side fully. So Nexa has taken a different approach to solving the problem, and it's a genuinely elegant insight made by Andrew Stone, the lead developer at Nexa. So rather than trying to make the proof of work computation itself directly useful, Nexa PoW version 2 makes the hardware useful for other participants in the ecosystem. This is an indirect, useful proof of work, and it sidesteps the fundamental problems with directly using proof of work for another purpose. So Nexa PoW algorithm requires that miners perform Schnorr signature verifications as part of the computation. Importantly, Schnorr signature verification is one of the major computational overheads in the mining and in the running of full blockchain nodes for all users, including the non-miners. So every transaction on the network requires signature verification to validate what was sent to it. So the full nodes do this constantly. The insight is that FPGA hardware capable of performing Schnorr signature verification efficiently for mining purposes can also be reused by non-miners to accelerate their node operations. So the mining ecosystem, as it develops, produces hardware that has genuine utility to the broader network, not just for the miners themselves. And non-miners will eventually be able to purchase or reuse FPGA hardware that was developed primarily for mining and use it to run faster and cheaper nodes. This is a novel security to the solution of the useful proof of work problem. Instead of making the computation useful, make the hardware outside of mining useful. The computation can retain the random memoryless properties it needs for consensus, while the physical hardware investment produces wider value for the whole ecosystem. So there is the known challenge in blockchain technology, which you heard earlier, the trilemma, because it requires achieving three opposing objectives. It's very difficult to simultaneously optimize a blockchain for security, scalability, and decentralization. Usually, maximizing two of these means making sacrifices on the third. So Bitcoin's design prioritizes security and decentralization. Running a Bitcoin node is something ordinary people can do, and attacking the Bitcoin network is extremely expensive. The trade-off is scalability, deliberately leaving Bitcoin's on-chain layer one throughput very limited, about 7 transactions a second. The scaling solution Bitcoin has pursued for layer two, the Lightning Network and the side chains, they move transactions off the main chain. So this is a reasonable engineering choice, but it has a serious drawback. The transaction fees that should flow to miners and replace the decreasing block rewards are diverted to non-mining owners of the secondary layers. So this weakens the long-term incentive for miners on the base chain. So Nexa utilizes a different protocol level choices. The goal is to pursue all three of the trilemma properties simultaneously. So here the indirect useful proof of work actually supports this because miners develop and deploy the FPGA hardware. They're capable of efficient signature verification, and that hardware can be redeployed by non-mining ordinary user and business nodes. It makes nodes cheaper and faster to run, even at high volumes. So this directly supports decentralization. And because the base layer is designed for high throughput and low fees rather than constrained throughput, scalability is a property of layer one itself rather than something bolted on via secondary infrastructure. So whether this fully resolves the trilemma is a fair question, but the key point is that Nexa's design elements are carefully considered for the long term. So a truly decentralized blockchain system must be self-funding through new coins or user fees. Bitcoin's fees are variable and become quite high during periods of network congestion, and some people have paid $50 or $100 for transactions when the network's busy, and at other times 5, 10, 20 cents. So they're very variable, and this is a deliberate design choice. Although Satoshi envisaged that as the block rewards decline, the high fees would sustain the mining incentive. But he was the one who put in the temporary 1 megabyte limit, which has constrained the capacity, and that has remained in place still today. And therefore, what he actually wrote in the paper, it's not possible to achieve. So Nexa's design intent is that the base layer itself should be capable of handling high volumes of transactions cheaply. Very low fees and high throughput are layer one properties, not things users access by using secondary infrastructure. The goal is that someone making a small payment, like buying a coffee or sending money to a friend, can do so directly on chain, quickly and cheaply, without needing to understand or interact with any additional layers or secondary apps. So this is a different philosophical position about what a blockchain should be. Bitcoin's often described as a settlement layer, but many consider it a foundation for high volume transactions and base for secondary layers. But where is the funding for the Bitcoin security going to come from as the block reward keeps declining? But however, Nexa is designed to be useful for everyday transactions directly. And as volumes eventually may climb, then there'll be more fees for the miners to replace the falling block rewards. That's the long-term plan. So what's required to run an Nexa full node? What does it actually mean to run a full node? So a node is software that is downloaded from nexa.org, and it maintains a full copy of the blockchain and independently validates every transaction and every block against the protocol's consensus rules. So it doesn't trust anyone else's copy of the blockchain state and makes its own conclusion directly from the raw data. This independence is the core of what decentralization means in practice. So if a user trusts someone else's full node, they're not really participating properly in the decentralized system. You're trusting a third party. And this is extremely important for private currency, that full node networks are as large and broad and as global as possible so that they can't be co-opted by any third parties. So running a node means that the software does a full check for itself, and the node won't accept invalid transactions or a fork that doesn't follow the rules. And the more nodes there are enforcing the rules independently, the harder it is for anyone to change those rules without broad consensus. And again, that's what's happened with Bitcoin, is it's very hard now to change any of the rules, the protocol consensus, even if it's for the benefit of the network. So the hardware bar is actually quite low. One of Nexa's deliberate design goals is to keep the node operation accessible. So running the node does not require enterprise hardware or specialized equipment. And I'm showing here a mid-range Intel N305 mini PC, but even just any old PC is sufficient for a stable, long upright, uptime node operation. A capable laptop with adequate storage can also serve as a node, although desktops and these units are preferable for the consistent uptime that makes a node genuinely useful to the network. The longer the node is on the network, the more pairs it attracts. Effectively, the more value it is towards the network, the more uptime it has. Some people will bring up their node just to make a payment and then turn it off again and bring it up to make another payment, 2 days later. That is not helping the full node network. So the main reason it matters is to prevent centralization. If running a full node requires expensive hardware or significant technical expertise, nodes will increasingly be run by corporations or well-resourced institutions rather than individuals. And as that happens, the set of users and groups validating the rules of the network will actually shrink in number, and the decentralization argument weakens. So Nexa's design philosophy is that low node requirements are not just for convenience, they're a requirement to preserve decentralization. So hardware considerations, mining and node operations are entirely different problems from a hardware perspective, and it's important to think of them as separate activities. So running a node is primarily about storage, memory, and uptime. The user needs enough disk space to store the full blockchain, enough RAM to keep the software running, and a stable internet connection with reasonably good bandwidth. And CPU performance is a secondary consideration. And non-mining nodes are not racing against anyone, they're simply validating and propagating data. So any reasonably modern consumer machine handles this comfortably including the latest Raspberry Pi 5 here, which you can get a case for that separately. And the advantage of this is the PCI socket, which I'll come to in a moment. So when people are mining, it also requires a full node or a full node interface to the outside world, but mining is more about raw computational power, maximizing the number of hash computations performed per second for the proof of work consensus. It demands additional specialized hardware, typically multi-core CPUs or GPUs or FPGAs or ASICs. The operational model is also different because mining is a business with costs, revenues, and margins. So node operation is infrastructure and the part of the overhead of being an independent user or an ecosystem service provider. So these activities involve different equipment, different budgets, and different operational mindsets. So during the second half of this year, Nexa PoW version 2 will be released, and it's significant for anyone thinking about mining Nexa, and it's worth understanding what it means. So version 2 of Nexa PoW will introduce a cellular automaton as part of the mining algorithm, and the key property of a cellular automaton in this context is that it can change configuration too frequently and too unpredictably for any dedicated ASIC hardware to be profitably designed and manufactured for it. So ASIC development takes time, and the Nexa PoW configuration would change before an ASIC can be deployed. And as we have seen, once ASICs become available, they tend to seriously centralize the mining. So our goal with Nexa now is to have the mining limited at FPGA, which still allows a huge competitive mining landscape. And what this means practically is that through the later part of 2026 and until the FPGAs become more common, ordinary hardware can compete like the situation we had in late 2022. So users don't need to have bought industrial mining equipment years ago. They can just use multi-core CPUs or GPUs or whatever they've got available until the FPGAs take the majority of the mining. So there's a window of accessibility before the FPGA mining fully develops, that the CPU and GPU window will be open for a little while. So this intent is to try and bootstrap engagement from the mining community once more. So for a miner, it's important to consider the economics of participation in the network. So hardware is only one cost. The ongoing operational cost that determines whether mining is profitable is electricity. So the economics of mining are fundamentally a balance between the cost of electricity and the amount of block rewards received at the current market price. So this calculation varies enormously by location. Someone with access to cheap renewable energy, such as hydroelectric, excess natural gas production, or solar panels on a sunny location will operate in a completely different economic environment to someone paying retail electricity rates in a high-cost market. So before investing in mining hardware, it's advisable to model electricity costs honestly, looking at the local rate per kilowatt hour, estimate the computer hardware's power requirements, and calculate a break-even Nexa price. And don't assume the price will move in the current trend, as that becomes a speculative factor. So for node operators, the key operational variables are bandwidth and uptime. A node that is frequently offline with limited bandwidth contributes little to the network. Nodes earn their value through consistent availability. And the more reliably a node is online, the more useful it is to the network as a whole. A node operation doesn't require expensive hardware, but it does require attention to uptime. So the real message is that participation has costs, and it's best to model them before committing as to what you do and separate out the potential upside of holding Nexa tokens with the economics of actively mining. So how earning Nexa works is to repeat from earlier. The miners earn Nexa in two ways. The first is the block rewards, the newly issued tokens that are created with each block, and we've just had a halving 2 months ago, and they're awarded to the miner who found the block hash that met target. So this is the primary revenue stream in the early life of the network when issuance is high. And the second is transaction fees, where amounts are paid to users, paid by users whose transactions are included in the block. And every transaction on the network carries a fee, and the miner will receive that. So in the early phases of a network, a proof of work network with a Bitcoin issuance model, the block rewards dominate the revenue picture and the transaction fees are relatively small. And over time, as the halving schedule progressively reduces block rewards, the transaction fees become proportionately more important. And this is the intended economic transition, going from a reward system subsidized by new issuance to one sustained by genuine demand for users for block space. So returning to the concept of UTXOs, when a miner earns a block reward, it doesn't arrive as a number just added to the balance. It arrives as an unspent transaction output, a specific discrete output locked to the miner's address. So in a wallet, this aggregates into a displayed balance, but on chain, it's a specific identified coin. So this matters for a few reasons. Each UTXO is independently spendable and independently lockable. When a user sees a wallet balance of, say, 1,000,000 NEX, that might be a single large UTXO from a block reward with fees, or more likely hundreds of smaller UTXOs from mining pool payouts accumulated over time. So the distinction matters when you spend, because spending requires selecting which UTXOs to use. Wallets automatically do that, but it's controllable for privacy and accounting reasons. Non-mining full node operators receive no direct protocol payment. Running a node is not compensated by block rewards. The contribution is to the network health, maintaining a decentralized network. The more robust and censorship resistant a network is, the healthier it is. It has a subliminal effect on price. The more numerous are the full node users, the more value the network has to the long-term holders. In the case of Nexa, like Bitcoin, a more decentralized network is a more credible one. So there is no direct compensation at the protocol level. If someone's considering participation and they actually want revenue, then mining is the formal way to proceed. But that will need the next Nexa mining upgrade, or alternatively another coin. Right, and just going to infrastructure participation versus speculation. Finally, it's worth dealing with this distinction. Speculation means acquiring a crypto, or in this case, Nexa, and the expectation that the market price will rise. People are making a bet on the price appreciation and their returns based on what someone else is willing to pay at a future date. But infrastructure participation means running a full node, and it could be mining or non-mining, and miners contribute real computational work to the network and earn tokens, and their rewards come from the protocol. And non-miners strengthen the network, and that indirectly benefits holders and ecosystem businesses and users, because they have a more robust network where funds are trusted. So running a non-mining node and holding is basically a speculative activity, but there's reasons for that speculation. There's logic to it. And these two activities are not in conflict, and some participants do both, but they carry quite different risk profiles and require different commitments. And speculation requires capital tolerance for volatility. Infrastructure participation requires capital in hardware and electricity, and an operational equipment commitment for uptime maintenance and requires some technical knowledge. The return profile is different as well because an infrastructure participant earns coins continuously as long as they operate, independent of the market price on a given day. They're exposed to the price when they eventually convert, but the earning itself is consensus driven, not speculative. Finally, most importantly, proof of work networks only function because enough people choose to do the hard work of providing the infrastructure. The security of the network, its resistance to attack, its decentralization, and its censorship resistance are all dependent upon the distributed and committed set of participants doing real computational work. And Nexa PoW version 2 is deliberately designed to keep that work accessible long term. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. And I'll stop my
Oh, I think you've
share.
got another screen there with how they can get an
Ah,
answer.
yes, yes, I do.
Just well,
I'll just do that once more.
I was gonna share the links, but I was gonna say I knew that you had the next slide there for
I
anybody that wants
do.
to.
Yes, of course, the next slide. With the white paper website, our X feed, and our
I'll,
LinkedIn.
yeah, I'll share all of those links in the chat.
Thank you, Danielle.
But just so that people um Um, yeah, so give us one moment. Thank you,
Okay.
Andrew, for that. Now you can stop sharing your screen.
Uh,
That was a lot of
okay.
information. And
Okay, thank you.
for anybody that does have questions, put them in there. We do have one. I have some myself. But the first question is there any time frame for Tailstorm?
Right. Well, Tailstorm is likely to be released um, in the within the next 6 months, probably in about 3 months' time, is my best guess. It's really up to Andrew Stone, who's our lead developer. But the latest information I have, and I've seen a demonstration of this, is that it's working perfectly. It's written, tested, and debugged, and it's on the Nexa testnet for our developers to use temporarily while the next hard fork's being done. The next hard fork is going to require our consensus changes as well, and that's the delay between of getting Tailstorm out is to get the our mining algorithm changes done as well. So that's why I'm saying 3 months or so.
And what is Tailstorm for those that don't know?
Right. So Tailstorm is an advancement on the proof of work where it's possible to create what's called subblocks. So in the case of which the Tailstorm, which we have now just released onto testnet, we're going to have 3 second blocks and 40 blocks per 2 minutes. And those 3 second blocks have got 1/40th of the proof of work target. So the proof of work target is actually broken into 40 parts, and anyone can mine what is called a subblock, which is a 40th. And when those 40 are mined, then that becomes a summary block. And what Tailstorm then does is it makes the block frequency much more regular. So in the case of Bitcoin with 10-minute blocks, you could have two blocks that are, say, 3 minutes apart or 5 minutes apart. And then you could have an hour wait for the next block. And then it could be 12 minutes and 45 minutes and then 11 minutes. And it's very variable. So even with Nexa, with its 2-minute blocks, we could have a couple of blocks that are 20 seconds apart. And then we could have an 8-minute gap. But what Tailstorm does, it actually makes the blocks very fairly regular in frequency. So they're basically going to be arriving almost every 2 minutes, not quite exactly every 2 minutes. That is actually a breakthrough in blockchain technology, is creating regular blocks, which people have wanted for a long time because it gives a lot of certainty over when a confirmation will arrive. And I know I've received a Bitcoin transaction before now where I thought, okay, I'll just hang around for 10 minutes for the confirmation. And it doesn't, and it takes like half an hour. And I thought, that's annoying. But with the Nexa blocks, you'll know that it will always be about 2 minutes. Also, the block reward is split into 40ths as well. So that means that it actually puts some of what happens in mining pools, it gives the mining pool functionality to the solo miners. So with a mining pool, you don't have enough hash rate to mine full blocks. You can just get partial block rewards. But with Tailstorm, it means that the block reward problem has been simplified in our case to a 40th of what it was. It means hitting targets easier. So it's easier for small miners to solo mine. So that's a big advantage as well. And the other thing is that Tailstorm gives fractional confirmations. So, so the subblocks can be counted, and you could have like zero point 0.2 of a confirmation or 0.71 of a confirmation or something like that. So it gives much more granularity. So in a retail context, when someone is, say, buying a coffee or a product from a shop and they're going to walk out the door in 10 seconds, within those 10 seconds, a few of the subblocks will be mined so that the merchant's wallet would have a really high degree of confidence that that transaction is going to work because they will have got partial confirmations. So Tailstorm is this kind of multifaceted protocol, directed acyclic graph is the technical terminology. It's quite exciting. We're the first blockchain to have it.
Oh, well, that does sound very exciting.
Mm.
I believe Rinku would like to speak with you directly, so I'll hand it over to you,
Okay.
Rinku.
Hello.
You're on mute.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hi.
Hey.
yeah, we can
Uh,
hear you.
okay, okay. I am audible, ma'am.
Sorry, what's your question?
Uh, Not more question. This is my dream to speak, Mr. Andrew. I am
Oh,
from
you're dreaming to
India.
Right.
speak with Andrew.
Okay.
Well, we've made your dream come
Thank you.
true.
Okay.
I, I am from India, and I am hard fan of Andrew. Uh, Actually, I work with Nexa in part time. Uh, Very good. I think this is a very good project in the cryptocurrency. I'm not basically from last in, 8 to 9 months, in Nexa. Not know about more about the cryptocurrency. I basically get the knowledge from Nexa blockchain or Andrew sir, your education or your video I saw in the past or like
Oh,
Andrew
yes.
Stone, like Peter Reason or some other developer team of Nexa or Bitcoin Limited. Very, very
Yeah.
good education. I think I got from the Nexa blockchain or Nexa developer team.
That's great. Well, thank you. Yes, last year in 2025, we did a lot of outreach. I think Sasa is here with us, and he helped manage our conferences. And Nexa had a presence at least 12 events throughout last year. We were quite excited to be able to do lots of presentations and talks and answer a lot of questions. So this year we've been more focused on developing our applications to run on Nexa, and we will be at some conferences and doing some more talks later this year for sure.
I
Right.
already want to join every uh, online meeting. I already joined the fourth year of celebration. But some question, not this is mine.
Yeah.
Some community working with Nexa with me across the 9 countries of world. Uh, uh, Firstly, what is the reason of falls of rate price of Nexa this time? I think this is the all-time low price of Nexa.
Did
Sorry,
you get
what is
that?
the reason? Can
Maybe
you
it's the the volume.
you
I'm having a hard time hearing him.
yeah,
I'm not sure. So
you're echoing, Rinku. Unfortunately, I hear an
maybe you
echo
can
as you
type your
talk.
question in the
Mm.
chat.
I will
Yeah.
try to. Uh, okay, just audible.
Oh, when will Tokedex be started?
Okay.
Tokedex,
Uh,
Tokedex is
uh,
is
my question is that most of the community ask what is the reason behind the rate fallen uh, almost all time low this time. What is the reason rate
oh,
fallen
the
in?
all-time low in the price is almost certainly because of uh, the issuance protocol where half the coins are issued in the first 4 years. That's unavoidable at the moment. But with the halving, there's much less that's going to be coming onto the market. So, yeah, unfortunately, that's the issuance is quite a large decaying curve there.
Yes, yes. Secondly, the first comes Tailstorm or Tokadex.
The tailstorm has to come first because we've got some opcode changes as well in the next hard fork, and Tokedex relies on these opcode changes.
Okay.
Right.
I read the roadmap of Nexa because the Tokadex may be coming in 2027, might be, but not confirmed yet.
It's working. It's written and working, and so it should be soon after the hard fork. So by the end of the year, I'm hoping. I would hope so by the end of the year, but I can't promise. But that's what I'm hoping would be the case.
Sir, one is the last question. Mostly in the mostly cryptocurrency, this is the major question. Uh, is anyone can fraud with the in the name of Nexa or because the Nexa is the permissionless blockchain.
Yes, it
Can
is.
anybody fraud with the Nexa smart contract or on create a website on Nexa in the future with the community? Is any possibility?
Um,
It's a two-part question. Anybody can duplicate a website and fake
No, 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 no,
to
no,
be
no,
Nexa.
no duplicate. There is no duplication option. I know Andrew sir already known that this is the permissionless blockchain. I am right,
yes,
sir.
yes,
Huh. So
yes, it is.
there is no need to permission to create any website or very simple smart contract to create on the Nexa blockchain. I already created an NFT on Nexa blockchain. My question is that is this is possible that any any person or any website can fraud with the community in the name of Nexa to create a smart contract or to create a website with the Nexa blockchain.
Um, the Nexa can interface with Web3 services, yes, um, and just like you could probably do with Ethereum or other blockchains. Um, but I think I think the best thing would be perhaps to um, come onto our Discord channel. You're probably already on the Discord channel and talk to one of the team members who's more expert on the smart contracts.
Mm. David, actually, we have a very good recording. David did on all the
Yes,
opcodes and the smart contracts. That recording is inside the Education Hub. So, Rinku, if you
yes,
missed it, I definitely would recommend checking that
yes.
and then reaching out to David. But we are going to move on because we're running out of time. I have a question from Jeff. Um, they want to know a little bit more about the expansion of the Nexa node. So, how is it more secure than the industry standard? Is it by the number of nodes involved or the other factors also at play?
Right. Okay. So, in terms of the security, it certainly has the Bitcoin level security actually in the software itself, but we have actually put in quite a few protocol improvements where some people can launch nodes which are effectively trying to attack the network. And so when nodes send information to each other on the Nexa network, what our nodes can do is they keep a score of how valuable the information is, effectively how trustworthy the other nodes are. And as the score goes up or down, if it goes down below a certain threshold, the node will get banned. So the Nexa nodes do have a very advanced method of scoring the value of the information sent by pair nodes on the network and using that to ban bad actors. So I think that's fairly unique in the blockchain space as well. That particular feature. So that gives a lot of security there. In terms of proof of work, Nexa is nowhere near Bitcoin, obviously, and that's something that we're going to try and get fixed through organic adoption. You know, hopefully get more users, more features, and more adoption, and then the market may value Nexa more, and then the hash rate will go up, and then the proof of work gets stronger. So it's a virtuous cycle. So that's the objective.
All right. And last opportunity for questions before we wrap it up. So please put any last minute questions in there. But I have one question for you. Somebody wants to get started and be a node. Where do they get started? I know you went through a
Right.
lot of information. How does
Yes.
somebody get started to be a node on the Nexa chain?
Okay. The first thing is to get yourself some small desktop computer and preferably either Linux or alternatively Mac. Windows is pretty much a waste of time unless you like torturing yourself. Um, so Linux is best, and then go onto nexa.org, onto downloads, and download the appropriate node for the hardware you've got. But there's also a guide that's been written for running full nodes, and the guide itself, I can't point that would probably be findable through an AI question as to can you find me the guide on running an Nexa full node, and you'll find a step-by-step guide on how to do it that way.
Beautiful. Well, what we will do when we launch the Build on Nexa um, short course, we'll make sure that that guide is inside the Education Hub for
Thank you.
those that want to get started.
Thank you.
My last question is, what is Tokedex?
Token. So it's a decentralized token exchange. So on Nexa, you can mint your own tokens and token series. And what you saw from Stephen last month with the card game, each of those cards is an NFT, which is effectively a token. And the Tokedex would be a way of having order books between the various tokens and either Nexa or what we're likely to launch soon, which will be a wrapped form of Bitcoin on the Nexa network. So that would form the basis of the pairs on the token exchange, and users can buy and sell tokens in a decentralized manner. So Tokedex is quite key to uh, getting a lot more engagement once we have apps running. It does require some of the more advanced scripting features, which is why it's pending upon the hard fork release itself. So that's what it is, a decentralized token exchange on Nexa.
And I lied. This is my last question.
That's
When
all right.
is the next a hard fork?
It's likely to be probably around October, is my best guess. But Andrew Stone will be able to give the exact date, but that's my
Okay.
guess at the moment,
But later this year, hopefully in
later this year.
Q4. Well, I personally learned a lot. I hope everybody that joined, everybody that's watching the recording learned a lot. I have a million more questions. We might actually just have to do a Q&A of like the problems with Bitcoin and the mining and the computational power and what's going to happen with that. And because as you mentioned, the more expensive and the harder it becomes, that means that there's a fewer players involved. What happens if it becomes too expensive to mine Bitcoin? Then who's validating the network? So I think that there's lots more questions I could ask you, but we might have to save that for another session.
Yeah, I think a Q&A, and we could get a few of our team members here and sort of parcel out the questions. That
Yeah,
would be great.
I think that would
Yeah.
be really good. Maybe the next one that we do, maybe a little bit closer, maybe leading up to the hard fork or something. We could just do a Q&A. I actually watched this, or I was listening to a podcast, and I thought it was a great idea where they allowed the participants to submit the questions ahead of time, but then they did like a live webinar to answer those questions and then be able to ask questions live. So maybe
Yeah.
we could do something like that.
Yes. I mean, I think that's a good idea. Have some prepared ones, but also, like we've just had, questions from left field. They're always fun and interesting as well. And thanks, Rinq, and thanks everyone for the questions.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for your time. Thank you, everybody that joined us. And we will share the recording in the Education Hub. And until next time, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.